It's now or never. Opportunity knocks only once. He who hesitates is lost. Strike while the iron is hot. We speak of being in the right place at the right time. The book of Esther describes a person who was in the right place at the right time. In chapter 1 of the book of Esther, we're introduced to a situation where we have a king. He is ruling over an empire. That includes that he is ruling over those from Israel who had been taken into captivity some years before. This Persian king at a 7-day feast at Susa for all of his chief men deposes Queen Vashti for refusing to come in and display her beauty before the men. This king Ahasuerus was probably Xerxes the first. And if so, the events of the book take place before in the days of the prophets Ezra and Nehemiah. But we remember the story of how the king had held this great celebration. He was showing all of his wealth, his power. After several days of banqueting with a lot of drinking, he sent for his queen Vashti to come in and display her beauty. We don't know exactly just what that meant. Some think that he actually wanted her to come in undressed. But at any rate, she refused to come in before all of these men. Many have praised Vashti for her sense of modesty. The point of the book is that Vashti was deposed, and this left an opening for queen. Xerxes needed a new queen. And so we come to chapter 2, and we're introduced to Esther. Esther was the adopted daughter and really the cousin of a Jew named Mordecai. And she was selected as Vashti's successor. We may be a bit taken aback at the process of all that went on, of her being taken into the harem, that she would eventually be selected to be the queen. But we're dealing with a pagan government. But Esther, whose Hebrew name was Hadassah, which means myrtle, had the Persian name of Esther, which means star. Now, Mordecai, we're told, discovers a plot to murder the king, and he passes on the information to Esther with the result that the plot was foiled. And this is written down in the annals of the king. When we come to chapter 3, we find that Mordecai offends a man named Haman. He's the new man over the princes. He really thinks rather highly of himself. But Mordecai refuses for some reason to bow down to Haman. It could have been that he considered it idolatry to bow down before this man. At any rate, he refuses to do so. Haman is most unhappy. Haman plans his revenge. And he's not going to just deal with Mordecai. And when he finds out he's a Jew, he determines that he's going to arrange to massacre all of the Jews in the empire. Some experts cast lots, which are called the Pur, the P-U-R, to fix a lucky day for the massacre. And the date is chosen some 11 months ahead. Haman sends the decree for the massacre throughout the empire. He has the king's approval for this. And the way the law operated in this empire, if a law was made, it could not be reversed. And so, way in advance, the order is given that on such and such a day, that the people of the empire are to go out and to exterminate, to kill every Jew, man, woman, child. And that cannot be reversed. Imagine that. You know, several months in advance, that you and your fellow people are going to be attacked and murdered. In chapter 4, Mordecai persuades Esther to intervene. Now, when Esther was selected to be the new queen, at the instruction of Mordecai, she didn't reveal that she was a Jew. This is going to come to light. She's here in this foreign land with her fellow Jews, and they are now threatened. So Mordecai he sends a message to Esther. You know, here you are queen, and you have the opportunity to save your people. Well, Esther says, now there is a problem here. Nobody can go into the king's court unbidden, not even the queen, apparently. If they go in and he has not summoned them, they will be put to death unless he puts out his royal scepter to them. She says, I am risking my life if I go in before the king unbidden. It's personally dangerous to her. Mordecai replies to her, chapter 4, verses 13 and 14. And we'll start with verse 12. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to the royal position for such a time as this? Mordecai says, now, whether you do anything or not, even though you're a queen, you will be put to death along with your people. You are not immune from the massacre. The Jewish nation, Mordecai says, cannot perish. Its continuance is guaranteed by God. Mordecai's understanding of God, the Old Testament scriptures, was, yes, God is going to preserve his people. On the other hand, Esther, if you do nothing, you and your family will perish. And then that statement, such a powerful statement. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this? You are in a position of power. You have the ability to intervene for your people. You can use your position to save your people. Basically, Mordecai is asking the question, how is it that you happen to be queen at this particular time? Did all of this happen by chance? Well, Esther says, well, okay. I will go into the king. If he does not put out his scepter, puts me to death. If I die, I die. In chapter 5, she approaches the king, and this is after a time of fasting by the people. She goes into him. He sees her. He puts out the scepter. Says, what can I do for you? Up to half my kingdom. I'll give you anything you ask for. She invites the king and Haman to a banquet. Says, here's what I want. I want you to come to a banquet. Well, when they come, the king says, now what do you want? She's not ready to tell him yet. She invites him to a second dinner the next day. In chapter 6, the king one night cannot sleep. So he orders the book of the Chronicles, that is his records, to be brought and read to him. Now, I don't know, maybe he thought that listening to that would put him to sleep. Whatever it was, he wanted that to be read to him. But it was found recorded there that Mordecai was the one who had exposed the plot to kill the king some time before. And so the king says, well, what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? And the reply is, well, nothing was done for him. The king said, well, who is in the court? Well, Haman was already continuing his plot to do things, and he was deeply troubled because Mordecai would not honor him. And so he had showed up early. He had bad things on his mind, trying to get rid of Mordecai. But here he is, and the king says, who's out there? Well, it's Haman. He said, bring him in. Haman entered. The king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman immediately thinks, oh, Who is there that deserves honor more than me? The king wants to know what to do to honor me. Haman thought this, and so he says, well, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, with a royal crest placed on his head. And then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. They put the robe on the man. They put him on the horse. They lead him through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Haman's all the time thinking, oh, it's going to be a good day for me. The king says, go at once, get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. Things were looking up for Haman, he thought, until this. Haman gets the robe, he gets the horse, puts it on Mordecai, that is the robe, led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is done for the man the king delights to honor. This is not going Haman's way. And afterwards, Mordecai returned to the king's gate. Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief. He told his wife and all his friends everything that had happened to him. And so his advisors, his wife, said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. Apparently, the people in Babylon knew some things about the history of the Jews, of God's working with them and for them. Maybe they remembered the story of Daniel. At any rate, the wife, the advisors say, I think you're in trouble here, big trouble. Well, while all this is going on, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared, the second banquet. Now, in the meantime, Haman had been advised to go ahead and get rid of Mordecai by his wife and his advisors. And so very quickly, he had built a gallows that was 75 feet high. And there was no elevator. 75 feet high. Why do you build a gallows so high? It doesn't take that much gallows to hang a person, does it? But it would be very visible for a long distance. And so this gallows has been prepared for Mordecai. Haman arrives at the banquet. King's there, Haman's there, Esther's there. The king again asks, this is chapter 7, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, O king, and if it pleases your majesty, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. If we had been merely sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes then asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is the vile Haman. Haman is terrified before the king and queen. The king gets up in a rage. He left his wine. He went out into the palace garden. Went out to cool off, I guess. Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. And just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. In those days, they reclined when they ate. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" Well, as soon as word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. They took him out to the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai and hung him. The king said, "Hang him on that gallows." And so they did so. Then the king's fury subsided. We still have that edict, though, that on a certain day, everybody gets to attack anybody that's a Jew. Male, female, grown-up, baby, everybody. How are they going to deal with this? The king cannot reverse the order. And so the king makes an edict that the Jews can defend themselves, and furthermore, his armies will assist them in that. Well, the Jews are victorious over their enemies. The people are spared. They institute a feast of Purim and celebrate their deliverance. Esther was indeed the right person in the right place at the right time. We might ask the question, what if she had refused to risk her life and use the opportunity? She was in the right place at the right time. But what if she had refused? What if she had thought somehow the other, well, maybe I can escape death if I don't do anything? But the important thing is that she said, if I die, I die. She risked her life. And because of her action, her people were saved. Now, the name of God does not appear in the book of Esther. Yet the hand of God clearly is seen. In the book of Esther, we have a beautiful example of God's providence. The word providence comes from the Latin provideo. Pro means before, video means to see. The New Dictionary of Theology defines providence as the beneficent outworking of God's sovereignty, whereby all events are directed and disposed to bring about those purposes of glory and good for which the universe was made. Providence is God at work, basically behind the scenes. Providence does not always involve the miraculous. And we don't know just how providence works today, but we believe God still uses those who will use opportunities. God is still in charge. John Willis wrote these words about Esther and her situation. When one views Esther's whole life, he realizes that it was hardly accidental that she was in the position in which she found herself at this critical moment. She might have been born at any period in human history, but she was born near the beginning of the 5th century. Her parents might have been of any race, but they were Jews. She might have been raised by any number of people, but she was raised by Mordecai. She might never have had an opportunity to become queen in a foreign land, but Xerxes angrily cast out Vashti, and Esther was the maiden whom he loved most. The Jews might never have been in danger during her lifetime, but Haman wrathfully persuaded the king to issue a decree against them. God moves in a mysterious way in the lives of individuals and nations to bring them to just that point in history when he can use them best in his purposes. Each individual needs to be alert to his divinely given opportunities when they come, or else he will fail to realize his very purpose for being on earth. Charles R. Swindoll said, "It's easy to see God in the miraculous. It's not so easy to see him in the mundane. But that's where we live. We live without seeing the handwriting on the wall or hearing thunder from Sinai. We live with God not center stage, but directing unobtrusively from the wings. A peculiar feature of the book of Esther is that, with the Song of Solomon, it shares the distinction of not mentioning God or any divine name once throughout its pages. Yet the fast-moving action in this drama is eloquent with the overruling providence of God in bringing Esther to the throne for such a time. At times, God may appear as if he is hiding himself, but seen or unseen, he ever accomplishes that which is according to his will. David Roper commented, the book of Esther has special significance for us because it shows how God worked behind the scenes in Esther's life, even as he does in our own lives. Perhaps, as we note how the Lord was at work in Esther's life, it will help us to see how God is at work in our own lives, especially as we look back and contemplate where life has taken us. God is still involved in his world. God is involved in our lives. Paul says to the Romans, for all things work together for good to those that love the Lord. Paul did not say that everything was good, but God can even use bad things for good. And God works through the lives of those who love him, those who are dedicated to him.